Few topics today provoke as much controversy as the education of our children. Hundreds of articles are printed daily, each addressing the current state of public education. Many more seek possible solutions to cure the problems that plague it. In the last 20 years, a growing number of parents have returned to a time-tested alternative to institutional learning. That alternative is homeschooling. Just a few years ago, homeschooling was the domain of mainly religious parents who wanted to instill Christian morals in their children. Today, however, the homeschooling movement is edging ever closer to the mainstream. But what exactly is homeschooling? And how do you know if homeschooling is for you and your children? This video will attempt to answer these questions.
Homeschooling is rebuilding the foundation of the family in America.
Half of the benefit of homeschooling is what your children avoid. The other half is what you choose to give them.
As long as we have the Constitution of the United States, parents have, in fact, the right to homeschool.
Have fun. Have fun. Did I say have fun? Have fun.
All across America, parents are pulling their children out of public schools to teach them at home. And they are experiencing unprecedented success. The homeschool movement is not new. George Washington, Theodore Roosevelt, and Thomas Edison are just a few of the well-known historical figures who were educated at home. The thriving homeschool movement has become one of the most encouraging developments in education in our country today. Parents who homeschool are not unlike most other parents. The main difference is that they believe that homeschooling is the best option for their children. These parents join the millions of other parents throughout history who have kept the primary center of instruction within the family. In the past, parents frequently were the sole instructors of their offspring. This method of teaching helped mold some of the world's greatest leaders, men and women with sound character, emotional stability, and intellectual genius. At least 10 American presidents were primarily taught at home. Generals, ministers, lawyers, scientists, authors, composers, and inventors are among the many who have benefited from a homeschool education. Children are different, each with unique abilities and gifts. For this reason, teaching and learning cannot be approached like an assembly line. Public education is built on the premise that all children of the same age should learn approximately the same thing at approximately the same time. This system ultimately burdens children with repetition, not original thought. This learned repetition only serves to stifle and suppress a child's potential. Even if a teacher understands the importance of original thought in education, they must work within a system where grade level advancement is the most important goal. This method of teaching has had an adverse effect on countless students. It destroys creativity and instead teaches the student to strive for acceptance and mediocrity. A comprehensive and centralized system of national education, separated from religion, as is commonly proposed, will prove the most appalling enginery for the propagation of anti-Christian and atheistic unbelief and of anti-social nihilistic ethics, individual, social, and political, which the world has ever seen.
Dr. A.A. Hodges' 100-year-old prediction has come true. To understand why public education is in such dire straits, it is important to understand its roots. Public education has only been around for a little more than 150 years. It began in 1837 when Horace Mann, a Unitarian minister, started the first state-controlled public school in Boston.
The foundations of the public school are very telling. In the late 1800s, there was a man who's considered the father of public education, Horace Mann. Horace Mann was essentially a Unitarian. He really believed that through the public schools of America, within 100 years, we could eradicate poverty and crime. I think he was just a little bit off. But he had a messianic vision of education. He saw that as being the answer. the state molding and shaping children into a certain way that they would be productive citizens. He was dead wrong.
Public education quickly turned from biblical truth to secular humanism. Secular humanists believe that through environment and education, man can be perfected without God. They saw the potential of government education and introduced socialistic philosophies into the schools. In 1897, John Dewey, the father of progressive public education, wrote, "I believe that in this way the teacher is the prophet of the true God and the usherer in of the true kingdom of God." But John Dewey's God was not the God of the Bible. If we have any ground to be religious about anything, we may take education religiously. He equated education with salvation.
Secular humanism has had a tremendous effect on our educational institution. John Dewey, who signed the manifesto, the Secular Humanist Manifesto in 1933, the very next year wrote a book called A Common Faith in 1934, saying we've got to take this and make it the official religion of the public schools. And he did that. He dedicated himself to teaching the basic tenets of secular humanism, which were to get rid of creator, creation, and God-given moral absolutes. To make it simple, the three things the Declaration of Independence says we hold are self-evident. Now, when you do that, then you create a vacuum, because the public schools without God are godless. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if you take God out, it's godless. And you cannot teach that there is a God, that there are God-given moral absolutes, or that man was created in the image of God in the public schools. The Supreme Court has said no. Well, now that's left us with a purely godless vacuum in the public school education.
Education is not neutral. What goes on every day in the public school system is not neutral. Someone's value system is being taught.
Charles Francis Potter summed it up best. Education is the most powerful ally of humanism, and every American public school is a school of humanism. What can the theistic Sunday schools, meeting for an hour once a week and teaching only a fraction of the children, do to stem the tide of a 5-day program of humanistic teaching? Secular humanist ideology is not dead. It continues to affect every area of public education. And the battle between humanism and Christianity continues to rage in the classroom today. Public schools are far from being objective institutions of higher learning. Instead, the beliefs of secular humanism have permeated every aspect of education. Christianity has been wiped from the history books.
I did a study back in the mid-'80s on textbook bias, and I looked at grammar school textbooks. And the main thing to keep in mind is that they were very anti-Christian, but in a very funny way. They were anti-Christian, and particularly, I might add, anti-Protestant, by leaving out all references to Christianity. This was the common procedure. You omit it. You don't make nasty statements about it, but after all, somebody might notice those. But you leave it out. And by leaving it out, you're making the implicit comment that it's not important.
The theory of evolution is taught as fact. The beliefs of many parents are challenged and referred to as myth, relegated to the same level as Greek mythology. This trend in education should alarm not only Christians, but every parent. Western civilization was built on the Judeo-Christian ethic. If these beliefs are excluded from everyday conversation, they're seen as irrelevant.
As long as that Christian teaching continues to be ignored in every significant conversation, it begins to raise a question in a young person's mind. Is my Christian understanding relevant to anything?
Good public schools do exist, and there are many excellent teachers in the public school system who care deeply about their students' educational and moral fiber. But they are constrained by an educational system built on naturalistic evolution, moral relativism, multiculturalism, radical feminism, radical environmentalism, and political correctness. A student's ability to read and write have taken a back seat to these humanistic ideologies.
For the past 150 years, the majority of American children have been educated in public schools. The results have been disastrous.
There's been recent studies done on how our students compare in the area of science and math, and we're down at 25th in one study, the 17th in another study in comparison to other countries.
Recently, the National Assessment of Educational Progress conducted 2 nationwide tests in reading and writing. The report found that 58% of 17-year-olds could not understand a 12th grade academic textbook, nor could they comprehend many articles in the Wall Street Journal, Time, or Newsweek. 95% of the 17-year-olds did not have the reading skills to understand college-level textbooks. 42% of 13-year-olds and 14% of 17-year-olds could not read at the 8th grade level, which is about the level of People magazine. 85% of 4th graders could not write a well-developed story. 72% of 11th graders could not write an adequate, persuasive article.
It's a sad commentary, but it shows that our public school system is hurting. Part of the problem is we have adopted things like the look-say method rather than the phonics method of teaching. We're emphasizing too much outcome-based education and not enough the basics. We're concerned more about attitudes, how children respond and think about homosexuality rather than whether these children really know how to read and write and figure, do math.
This is not necessarily a criticism of teachers. There are numerous good teachers who work in public and private schools. There are numerous horrible teachers too. But because of the way that this system is designed, it has been developed again over the years, it is very difficult, nearly impossible for a teacher to break out of that and to individualize, to be flexible, to take advantage of the teachable moment, to speak to the strengths and weaknesses of each individual child, 25 or 30 of them, in one classroom.
Math scores give more reason for concern. The National Education Goals Report found that only 15% of 4th graders, 18% of 8th graders, and 16% of 12th graders reached a competent level on a math survey test. Another test exposed the glaring lack of historical knowledge by 17-year-olds in public schools. More than 2/3 of them did not know when the Civil War occurred, while 3/4 of them could not say within 20 years when Abraham Lincoln was president. The report went on to say, more than 1/5 of the students could not identify George Washington as the commander of the colonial forces during the Revolution. Almost 1 in 3 did not know Lincoln was the author of the Emancipation Proclamation. And nearly half failed to recognize Patrick Henry as the man who said, "Give me liberty or give me death." Well, the old proverb rings true. Those who do not know history are condemned to repeat it. As today's students become tomorrow's leaders, one must ask, what does the future hold?
The battle for the hearts and minds of America's children continues to rage in our schools today. And that battle is intensifying. Some educators are pushing for even more influence and control over the lives of their students.
The National Education Association, for example, recently wrote, "Schools will become clinics whose purpose is to provide individualized psychosocial treatment for the student, and teachers must become psychosocial therapists. Children are to become objects of experiment."
The fact of the matter is that public schools, no matter how you want to look at the history of public schooling, public schools are a way to try to control the thinking of the citizens in the United States of America. What the critics of homeschooling hate, typically, is that they cannot use the public schools any longer to shape, mold, and control the thinking of these young people, and that really irritates them.
The enemy is alive and well, even today, even though it's legal in all 50 states. The National Education Association, for instance, goes to the trouble of every year passing a resolution saying that homeschooling shouldn't be legal, but if it is, they urge their teachers to work for legislation that would require homeschoolers to be licensed teachers and that their curriculum be approved by state specialists. Both of these are anathema to the homeschoolers, would outlaw homeschooling as we know it.
As the NEA's agenda continues to weave its way into school curriculums, Potter's question must be taken seriously. What can be done to stem the tide of a 5-day program of humanistic teaching? For more and more parents, the answer to that question is homeschooling. Parents from every background, regardless of cultural heritage, skin color, or religious worldview, are choosing to teach their children at home. And although parents quote a variety of reasons for this decision, the majority of homeschoolers do so to preserve and pass down traditional moral and educational values.
There are many reasons people homeschool, and researchers have been, looking at this for years. I would say that there are 5 main reasons. The first one that comes up repeatedly is that parents want to pass on to their children a certain set of values, beliefs, and culture. And they believe that they can do that better and more consistently than can a conventional school or traditional classroom. Now, the other reasons that are, we might say, secondary and yet very important, and when we ask people in homeschool research, and they'll tell us about these things, these are very important, even though they may not be the main reason for most people. And those would be one of 4 different things. First of all, they want real strong academics for their children. They want to make sure they learn the 3 R's like schools are supposed to do. Second of all, they want strong family relationships. That is, they want to have good interaction between children and parents, and not only children and parents, but between siblings within one another. So they want good, strong family relationships. They also talk about that they want guided and reasonable social interactions for their children. That is, they want to just throw them out there with a randomly assigned group of same-age peers, some adult they may not know, some bus driver they may not know, but they want guided, reasonable social interactions for their children. And then the 4th reason that's coming up more and more, and we're finding this in the research and all across the country, is that parents are concerned about the safety of their children.
Homeschooling is making a difference. Parents are having a positive effect on their children's education. Even more, family members are developing a stronger commitment to each other. Unlike many children enrolled in public schools, homeschoolers are able to develop strong relationships with their families, largely because they spend so much time together.
When Zan first came to me and said that she wanted to homeschool Ty, I thought she was crazy. In my experience growing up, no one I had ever known had homeschooled or knew anything about it, and we were really even nationwide kind of on the front end of this wave, I think, that's sweeping the country now. But I finally figured, we were only going to teach him 5-year kindergarten for a year, and I thought, well, we can't mess the kid up in that period of time because all you do is learn shapes and colors. So we started doing it like a 1-year experiment, but every year as we sat down and reassessed that we'd want to do it again, it was an easier and easier decision to make because of what it was doing in the life of our family. Our family stayed close. And I would notice at work, hearing my friends talk about their family, that they just weren't as close as we were. And I know the reason now is that we were homeschooling.
The family bond has just been strengthened by doing this together. And it really has become an important part of our family history. It becomes part of who we are and how we relate to each other. And it's been a very positive thing for all of us and the people we know as well.
I think that the vast majority of adults who have children, by the time these parents hit about 35, 40 years of age, they realize, my goodness, my child is growing up so fast and I haven't been spending much time with my child. And it's a great regret of many people who are older. And in fact, several different studies have examined how much time does a dad and a mom spend in any meaningful conversation with their children. It's just almost sadly amazing that fathers spend something like less than 5 minutes a day in any kind of meaningful relationship talking with their children.
Most public school students spend the majority of the week away from their parents. A great portion of their time is spent at school, either in the classroom or developing extracurricular activities. These students often stray from their family's beliefs as they give in to peer pressure.
Public schools are overflowing with students involved in drugs, alcohol, sex, and violence. Biblical truths have been replaced by humanistic ideology with tragic consequences.
The statistics are scary. There was a statistic a few years ago from the Guttmacher Institute that found 86% of male students by the time they're 19 are sexually active outside of marriage. They found that among 15-year-olds that it was close to 50% were sexually active. Where is this coming from? I believe it's coming from a lack of moral direction, a lack of teaching the difference between right and wrong.
Ultimately, it is not the educator's responsibility for a student's growth, but the parents.
I'm firmly convinced that if any person takes an honest look at the scriptures, they'll find out if they go, whether it's Deuteronomy 6, all throughout the Proverbs, Proverbs 22, if they look at Ephesians 6, again and again and again through the scriptures, it's very clear that God gave to parents the mandate to educate their children.
And I think as a Christian that God gives us a responsibility for training all of our children. All Christians are responsible for training their children. In fact, I think all parents are responsible for training their children. Now, we can choose to delegate that responsibility to private schools or to public schools, and sometimes that's a valid option for people. But that means if you're going to delegate, you need to be involved. It doesn't mean it's okay, I'm going to drop my kids off at school and walk away and go on with my life. Then get involved with them. But you can't get more involved than homeschooling.
When God tells us to teach our children as we rise up, as we sit down, as we walk by the way, as we go through our everyday lives, if we don't do that, if we fail to do that, there are some serious consequences to that. And as a pastor, I've watched those consequences.
I think it's important for parents to always remember that whoever provides the education will set the goals for that education. So if you choose a government school, you are choosing to have your children educated according to the goals of those who operate the government school system. If you choose to send them to a church school, you're choosing to have your children educated according to the goals of the people who run that church. If you homeschool them, you as a parent have to discern what are our goals as a family? What is it we hope to accomplish in the lives of our children? But whoever runs the school will always set the goals, and whoever sets the goals determines the outcome of the education.
As a father of 7 children, God has really impressed upon me how important it is that I nurture these children's never-dying souls. The consequences of my action now and how I educate them will have eternal consequences for my children.
The Bible is clear. Parents are accountable for their child's training and instruction.
Parents who take their children out of public schools are unified by one central belief. They believe that they can do a better job at home than educators in a conventional school. Today's parents have a vast array of resources available to them through public libraries, homeschool curriculums, and more recently through the internet and CD-ROMs. But is homeschooling for everyone? Just how do you know if it will work for you and your family? This next section will help to answer these questions.